I could hope for but one thing for you. So you be curious in all that you do. 'Cause love like a flower just wants to grow. Oh, and knowledge like your heart just wants to be known. If you like, please subscribe. This is Bitcoin Study Sessions.
Welcome back, or welcome to another session here. Today we're discussing the Instant Settlement series by Ivan Makedonsky. And we were just talking a second ago about how to pronounce his last name. I'll just call him Ivan. We're now on a first name basis because of my ignorance of phonetics of his last name. So the Instant Settlement series is a series of essays by Ivan in Bitcoin Magazine from December 2023 to March 2024. So this is actually an excellent essay series. I'm really excited we're talking about it right now. We've just finished up Broken Money, and this essay series on instant settlement is kind of a practical application of some of the theorizing that Alden is doing in Broken Money. So in Lynn Alden's Broken Money, she describes how he went off the gold standard because gold could not settle quick enough. That is, once we enter the age of telecommunications, we could transact at or near the speed of light by sending a telegram, a simple message. But gold couldn't keep up with that. Gold can only move at the speed of material, the speed of horse, whatever. And gold also takes additional time to authenticate. So a large gap arises between transacting by telegram and settling that transaction with gold. This speed gap led to the rise of fiat money because that's not backed by anything. It can settle at the speed of transactions. It's just words. But in the fiat era, settlement then is delayed because banks are not open 24/7 and transactions are usually done through credit, and that's only kind of settled much later. So what then, the question is, if settlement could be done instantly with a gold-like hard and scarce commodity? And so with Bitcoin, then that's possible. The speed of settlement catches up with the speed of transactions, bring along with it something that's scarce and hard capped like Bitcoin. So it's now possible. So what Lucas and I are going to talk about today is the Instant Settlement series, an exploration of that concept of what happens when settlement catches up with transaction and it's backed by Bitcoin, and it is in Bitcoin rather. I'll do what we usually do, give a short summary of this series, and then we'll talk about it in depth afterwards. So Ivan's Instant Settlement series, as I said, explores how instant settlement can change things. And so he really explores various industries, and then also not just the potential changes within industries, but our psychological outlook in general relating to work itself. So the Instant Settlement series consists of 6 essays. The first 5 essays explore the potential effects in various industries, construction, logistics, publishing, streaming, and gambling. And the final essay then kind of summarizes the insights from this exploration and goes deeper into those psychological implications of instant settlement on the nature of work and kind of even what we are as humans. A couple of asterisks to the discussion. Ivan says right up front that he does not have expertise in these industries he discusses. So an industry insider might listen or read the essay and say, that's not how it actually is. But he gets the details broadly right, I think. And again, he's up front that he's not an expert. And the importance is in the overall picture of how an industry might run and the concepts involved. And of course, in me and Lucas's discussion, it's going to be even more kind of, some details are going to drop out. So a second asterisk, Ivan is the chief of staff at Breeze, which is a company that is working to integrate Lightning payments on the Bitcoin network into apps and services. So he exhorts the reader at the end of each essay to go out and build the app that could enable the Bitcoin Lightning Network to work in an industry that he's describing in that essay. And a lot of what he's doing is kind of tracing a general outline or way that an app or set of smart contracts or something like that could take advantage of the Lightning Network in order to transform an industry. That is, he's not designing an app. He's kind of doing a really broad kind of brainstorming thing, spitballing to help generate new ideas and spark interest. So the importance is not that he's right about an app functioning kind of as he generally describes in each essay to integrate Lightning into a particular industry, but that he opens the door to new thinking about how we might get things done if we did have instant settlement in that industry through such an app, through any potential app, and given that instant settlements in the Lightning Network are now possible. So to begin this discussion, the first essay, I'm not going to go methodically through each essay, but the first essay does give an overall picture of how he talks about the Lightning Network potentially transforming industry if an app was designed to apply it to an industry. So he begins with an example. In the construction industry, imagine building a house. You have different parties that are involved in carrying that project out. The house buyer, the construction company, the house planner, like the architect, the construction worker, and the construction supervisors. And in this, each party kind of has their own incentives, and those incentives are not always aligned. For example, the house buyer, of course, they want to get it done as quick as possible to the highest degree of quality possible. The construction worker, on the other end, at least as far as financial incentives, they're being paid for their time worked. So it's not, that person is not inherently worried about how long it's going to take. They're collecting their salary and pay. They're not also inherently worried about doing the highest quality possible because, again, they're just based on, generally speaking, the time that they spend doing the work. So to align incentives, you want a way to reward people not for time passed on the job, and this, of course, applies to many other industries, but for work, the actual work that they are doing, the speed and the quality that they're doing that work at, and that they're completing it efficiently. Instant settlement, Ivan thinks, can help do this. An app can be constructed potentially using Lightning payments on the Bitcoin network such that construction workers can be paid for incremental tasks done on the way to completion of an entire project. To quote Ivan, unlike traditional payment systems, these technologies eliminate the delay between completing physical tasks, such as placing a brick, and receiving compensation. So the idea is that an app could potentially be structured so that tasks such as building a wall, assembling a window, have independent payout. Workers then would not be paid for their time spent doing those smaller, more granular tasks, but upon completion of the task, which incentivizes, of course, the speed at which it gets done. Quality could also be incentivized in this framework. The supervisor then inspects the potentially completed job for quality. They then mark it as completed, photograph it, and report it in a potential app that one might design. This app could also integrate a reputation system, rating a worker on the overall quality of the task completed, and then the higher a worker's reputation over time, the more likely they would get assigned future tasks. So in this model, the worker would not necessarily need to be on payroll, but could be independently hired for each task. This would place the worker in some sort of gig economy, essentially, and would kind of decentralize overall the distribution of work and incentivize worker skill development and reputation building. That really simplifies Ivan's discussion of the construction industry, but it brings out the key insight from that discussion and one of the key benefits that Ivan thinks will come from an instant settlement being more integrated into the construction industry, but industry in general. And it is that instant settlement can help move us from a pay for time to a pay for work model. When we pay for time, the incentives are to extract the maximum amount of reward and pay for the minimal effort. The office space, you're watching the rewards, clock watching, maybe even negative behaviors like taking credit for others' achievements, parasitism in the workplace when you want to kind of glide along with others and do as little as possible yourself. You're getting paid as the clock moves, so what more is needed? In that type of mindset, skills then corrode over time because people are passing time is what is rewarded, not necessarily doing good work. And all of that changes us psychologically when we're in a pay for time framework. Pay for work, as allowed by instant settlement on the Lightning and Bitcoin network, in that type of model, best performance yields the most money, because one's going to get new projects in the future. People are incentivized then to develop their own skills and to maintain their reputation. Competition over those smaller projects leads people to further develop themselves. This kind of reintroduces the idea of craft, of developing your work into an art, which tends to then satisfy people, we might say spiritually or as full human beings, and lead to their retention in the long term. So if we switch from a pay from time to a pay for work model, society then is also made better as things are produced more efficiently. We incentivize speed and quality and to a higher standard. Incentives then are better aligned in a pay for work model. An example that Ivan gives, he gives a Sun Tzu quote that's interesting. He will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. So the idea is when you have a team, each player should want the same kind of end goal, to win the game. You don't want a player out kind of maximizing their own fame or their own stats at the expense of the team. Pay for work aligns incentives on the completion of the job rather than workers seeking their own benefit by like delaying completion to accrue more time and more pay that way. Even more broadly speaking, Ivan believes this can shift us from a kind of fiat mindset. If people are not tethered to one time-based job, but instead complete many task or project-based jobs, then again, that decentralizes work, allows more freedom. People aren't tethered to one job. They have more freedom to pick and choose project consistent with their own goals. People maybe even stop chasing money and instead chase the projects that fulfill them or help them develop their craft. It's not going to be easy, Ivan notes, acknowledges, warns, to change from societally a default mental model based on pay for time to pay for work. To quote Ivan, quote, defeating this enemy requires a collective willingness, the enemy being the pay for time model. Defeating this enemy requires a collective willingness to break free from the allure of effortless gains and embracing a more natural, purposeful way of working. So that's one benefit of instant payment, is the shifting of mental models and payment models from payment on time to payment on work. Instant settlement also offers other potential benefits. It gets rid of fees that are charged by intermediaries and also avoids counterparty risk. And so an example from the logistics industry in the second essay, I think helps flesh these potential benefits out. So again, to give kind of a rough and dirty account of how logistics might work, a typical delivery might look something like this. The buyer buys from a website, a product of some sort. The retailer of that product is notified to send it to the buyer's address. The retailer arranges delivery of that through a logistics company. The delivery person from that company collects the product from the warehouse. The product works its way through some sort of delivery ecosystem, maybe various warehouses bouncing around, until it finally reaches the hands of the final delivery person who takes it to the buyer's location. So there's two frictions in this system. A first friction in this, when the fiat system is used to manage logistics, are credit card and bank fees. The buyer is probably going to pay a website in credit with the credit card. There's going to be a credit card fee, 1% to 3% fee. Website's going to then have to pay the retailer another 1% to 3% fee. The retailer pays the delivery person 1% to 3% fee. Instant settlement with the Lightning Network would potentially allow for elimination of this friction because the credit cards and the banks are disintermediated. They're removed from the equation. And so fees then are much lower on the Lightning Network. So those fees are eliminated. Another friction with logistics in a fiat system, all these credit payments present a counterparty risk. Whenever any credit is extended, you're hoping the other party is going to be good for it at the end of the day, that a bank or credit card company is not going to go bankrupt, that the party itself is not going to go bankrupt. So there's always the risk of non-payment when credit is used. This counterparty risk is minimized with something like the Lightning Network that would remove credit from the equation in different parties like banks and credit card companies. So that's then here. So far, we've seen these cumulative benefits of instant settlement for the Lightning Network. Pay for work, not time, removing credit card companies and banks from the equation, minimizing counterparty risk associated with extending various forms of credit. One more advantage of the Lightning Network potentially is it allows for split payments, which I think is best illustrated in another one of Ivan's essays through the example of publishing. So we could imagine a book that is published, and maybe this book is also translated and then sold. The parties then would be, roughly speaking, publisher, author, translator. You can use a lightning payment with an app upfront designed for this purpose could automate the splitting of payments between the publisher, the author, and the translator based on a specific proportion, based on the amount of work actually done, so that each sale automatically sends the payment to that party. In this way, each party then earns a fair share based on what they did. And the app automatically splits those payments, eliminating the counterparty risk. For example, in the fiat system, the author and translator might wonder, is the publisher actually reporting the correct number of sales? Will they continue paying royalties into the future? But if it's all automated up front with an app made possible using the instant settlement of the Lightning Network, then that counterparty risk is eliminated. So there's more insights in this settlement series, but I think this is kind of some of the bigger ones up to this point, which are that Lightning payments through an industry-specific app can really disrupt and transform things by paying for work instead of paying for time, aligning incentives of different participants in a task, decentralizing work based on task-specific jobs enabled by a reputation system, cutting out credit card and bank middlemen, minimizing counterparty risk, and allowing split payments to reward true effort. So this doesn't touch yet on Ivan's discussion of streaming or gambling, but we'll kind of stop the general summary there and discuss this a bit, because this is, I think, a very interesting set of concepts on the table. And I have some questions I've kind of concocted here, but I'm wondering, Lucas, that was a lightning summary of the lightning series here. Anything to add to those accounts, construction, logistics, or the general concepts drawn from those at this point?
I think Ivan does a very good job of elucidating to us what we all inherently feel as some sort of undercurrent of potential change, but very often do not think about in terms of it. The world that he is describing seems so good for everyone involved that it's almost hard to think about, hard to wish for, because you don't want to be disappointed if it doesn't work out that way. So um, I like how he has taken these different industries and broken them down to give us these examples. When I first heard about Bitcoin, the first thing that I thought of was something along the lines of kind of the publishing side, which would be, um, either in agriculture or with music, that I sell the cow and I retain the ownership of that cow all the way to the plate. And so that everybody who adds value along the way, I get a portion of that. And as you climb that value ladder, where it goes from the rancher to the butcher to um, the well, you can go straight to the restaurant if you want, but let's just say there's just three: rancher to butcher to restaurant. Um, you sell it for $3 a pound here, and then it's $15 a pound here, and then it's $30 a pound here at the end. And so there's that 10x increase that up until now producers of commodities have never been able to capture. And they've been working to try and capture that by providing value, by saying, okay, in an effort to gain more of the value that I put forth, what we're going to do is try to develop a system that shows you exactly where your food came from. This is from steer number 228 that came off the Maddie farm, and it was born on March 6th, and it was slaughtered on slaughtered on May 1st. It weighed, you get all that information, and so there's a lot of value to a consumer like that. This allows for that. The other thing is like in music, I can see right now, you can see people that are putting out music that otherwise would never have been able to because they're very specialized. People that are like beat makers, like, oh, I'm just gonna make a beat. I'm gonna put it up on BandLab, and then I'm going to let people fork it just like they fork code. Um, and they can fork my original. They can take my beat. They can put guitar on it, and they can put that up. And then somebody else can see that, and they can put marimbas on it. Somebody else can see it. They can put organ on it. Somebody else can see it, and they can put rap lyrics on it. Somebody else can see it. They can have a chorus over it. And so at the end, you end up with um, this collaboration of people that are working together only because the thing that they're doing is what they were going to do anyways. It's what they're good at.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, yeah, the expression of aligned incentives comes out so strongly. Um, I'm so glad that he reached out. So Ivan reached out after we did our first podcast on software, and he reached out and said, "Hey, I've written these, and I think you guys might enjoy discussing them." I'm so glad that he did because um, this is the important part. I've heard Jack Mallers talk about this, and I completely agree. Bitcoin will never go anywhere if it's only used as a store of value. Look at gold, right? I mean, gold didn't go anywhere because it was a store of value. It was too unwieldy to use in everyday transactions. And so it's very important for the long term life of Bitcoin that it become used as a medium of exchange in daily transactions. And I pulled up some of the stats, this off Perplexity, so hopefully I can trust this. Um, how is the usage of the Lightning Network increasing compared to Bitcoin? So obviously the Bitcoin layer is not meant. It's meant to be slow, right? It's meant to be very slow. Um, so the Lightning transactions in the last 2 years have increased by 1,200% in terms of okay, so reaching an estimated 6.6 million transactions per month. There's a high in there of I think December 24 was a high of like 72 million transactions, and so it is growing. It is growing very fast. But to put it in perspective, it says, you know, monthly active users on the Lightning Network are estimated between around 300 million and 300,000 and a million. And so I went back and I looked at what other network effect models like Uber and Amazon and Facebook, when did they reach the million monthly active users mark? And the records they don't really go back that far. So to think of it in terms of that way, like I first started using Facebook, I think in 2005. It was very recently after, like it was, I was within probably 6 months, I think, of it at Harvard. I can't remember how fast that they spread it out, but I remember I was a junior and that was 2005. And so, but anyways, it was about that. So think about like Facebook in 2005 is basically where the Lightning Network is now. Um, and it's growing incredibly rapid. It's being utilized by people that don't even know they're using it. Cash App uses the Lightning Network to transfer value. And so people are using the Lightning Network and experiencing as good or better of an experience as they ever did before. And they don't even know it. I think that's a sign of a great technology.
Yeah.
is that it has been utterly frictionless in terms of replacing the settlement rails. Um, I will I will stop there because I've got some other
No,
notes.
yeah, because
Okay.
I'm gonna. Those are such
Yeah, I
excellent
think.
points that you raise. So just like I love that you're, Ivan did reach out to you, and as you said, how fortuitous, because this is exactly the perspective that complements like Alden's macroeconomic perspective is actually then boots
Yeah.
on the ground, how we get this stuff done. It's another part of Alden's kind of conclusion is the stuff doesn't do itself. This is stuff that takes, you can't just say Bitcoin fixes this. It's people using Bitcoin are going to fix things, and like knowing how to do it, coming at it with knowledge from your own industry. I loved the example you give from ranching because you have a deep background in agriculture. You know a lot about that industry from a lot of different angles, and just hearing how you apply these concepts that Ivan has drawn out, that the instant settlement nature of the Lightning Network on the Bitcoin protocol can align incentives, split payments between the different parties, rewarding value provided, divide the different steps into kind of discrete completed tasks. Like those are general concepts that we can take to each of these different industries, like you did with ranching, and whatever industry, whoever dear listener you're in, like how can you better align incentives? How can you better divide value among the actual value providers? How can you reward value instead of chair dampening and clock watching? I mean, that's instant settlement is a very powerful idea. And thinking about these things, writing about them, having the courage to do it too. Like Ivan is not an expert in this industry. And when you extend beyond your expertise, in a world of social media, you open yourself up to kind of the easy jab, right? If you get some small detail wrong. But it's not about the small details here. It is about like generating a suite of fresh ideas and kind of general concepts that, people can use in their own industry and walk of life to really build out the Bitcoin network. And I just wanted to finally remark on, I loved your music example as well. That person could come up with a beat, a hook, or something like that instead, and then like that can be the project or the task itself. We like break things down into different tasks. A person could do that, follow their own aesthetic direction, their own meaning and purpose in life, their own creativity, instead of just like, I'm going to go join some like music studio or whatever to help some established artists fill out their songs, and whatever they need, I'll do. Instead, if you can monetize your own artistic and creative direction, you can bring more of yourself into the world through something as like technical sounding as instant settlement. It's just such, these things have, Bitcoin has transformatory potential, and it kind of sows and reaps that potential through its technical powers, like instant settlement. And so that, like, I just love your examples, and you're tying the macroeconomic down to what people are actually doing.
Yeah. So the the story that I read the other day that makes me think of this is, so think about music, and when you hear a musician interviewed and they talk about all of their inspirations and who are the people that they listen to in order to become the musician that they are. What they've done is they've cribbed from that person. They've used as inspiration. That's a way of saying I copied it until I made it my own, basically. And think about how fascinating it would be to see the hereditary tree of the tracing of all of these people's inspirations um, through the settlement contracts of all of these different beats. So let me back up to frame the story that I'm talking about. The story that I was reading was the Beatles released an album called Rubber Soul, and one of the Beach Boys, I think it was Brian Wilson, I'm not sure which one, um, one of the Beach Boys heard that album and said, "This is the greatest album that's ever been created. I'm going to listen to this until I'm inspired to do something better." And so he listened to that until he was inspired to write a song called, I think, Only God Knows Why, maybe, where God only, I think maybe it's God Only Knows. And then they release an album. The Beach Boys release an album called Pet Sounds, which is one of the, like, this is the Beatles and the Beach Boys. These are two of the most famous bands to have ever existed, right? So these albums are shaping culture, hundreds of millions of people at a time. They release an album called Pet Sounds. The Beatles hear it and decide that this song, God Only Knows, is the greatest song that's ever been written, and they're not going to stop until they do something that equals it. And so they listen to that album on repeat while writing another album called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which was it was like, at the time, it was like the most transformative thing that had ever happened in music. It was this, um, it was songs that were put together in like chapters in a story. They all went together, and you know that because I'm doing this with my own music right now, where each one kind of leads into the other. But this was like, making this massive thing out of, oh, instead of just 3.5 minutes, we're going to put all this stuff together. Um, but I just think about that, like when you watch a football game and they show Andy Reid, the coach of the Chiefs, and then they show all the coaches that are tied to him via
Yeah.
relationships and coaching tree and stuff like that. Think about if you could have that for music. Like, how cool would that be? I just, and granted, this is one of those, like, how cool would that be things that it doesn't necessarily add a whole lot of value up front that you think. But it turns out that a lot of times these how cool would that be things have underlying value adds that we haven't even considered yet.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the the you cannot overstate the transformative nature of work by the hour versus work by the task, work by the job, work by the performance. Now we're going from paying people X amount per year to play baseball to paying them X amount per home run, X amount per single, X amount per walk, X amount per great play. Um, we're able to have a truly equivalent structure. Like, one of the things that came up so there was this lawfare suit against Elon Musk for the bonus that he got for Tesla. It was this guy that, it was one of these very frivolous lawsuits where a guy buys 9 shares so that he can be considered as a shareholder, and then sues for some sort of breach or whatever. And it was to invalidate the bonus package that Musk got, which was the biggest. It was like a $60 billion bonus package, the biggest package that anybody had ever gotten in history. But he got it because he met these incredibly stringent bonus requirements. It was like double the company sales every single year or something like that. And if you don't do that, he got nothing. And if he did do that, he got something.
Yeah.
And one of the arguments made by the prosecution there was that the negotiations for the bonus were not done in an adversarial enough nature. And how beautifully does that describe how beautifully screwed up the system is, where the idea is that if you're negotiating with someone to give them a bonus for running the company that you want to see succeed, that you're supposed to be adversarial. You're on the same side.
Yeah.
You both own the same equity. This is it really is. It's tantamount to just, it brings to mind, all of the bad things in society. You said chair dampening. I'd never heard that term before.
Sit in a chair long enough, earning your money, and you will see where it comes from.
Chair dampening and clock watching. One of the insults on the farm, is somebody shows back up and you haven't gotten very far, and they're like, "Oh,
yeah,
you must be working by the hour today, right?"
Right. Yeah.
And there's actually, I don't know if you've heard this. There's what's called Parkinson's law. So Parkinson's law is that work expands to fill the time allotted for it.
Right.
This is why you should never have meetings that last X amount of time. It should be, hey, we're going to do this and then we're going to leave.
Yeah.
Because if you have a 2 hour stand up meeting every Monday, it will last 2 hours every single Monday.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, it brings to mind all of those things. But moving away from the adversarial nature of negotiation into an aligned incentive structure
Hmm.
where everyone along the way is getting paid to perform. It I'm trying to think. I mean, the gig economy is a great example of this. Obviously, this is kind of where it started, but um, to grow that, um, you just see a lot less waste in the system and a lot less attacks on the system, a lot less
Yeah.
union negotiations, right? So
Right. Yeah.
stuff like that.
No, that it's supposed to eliminate waste. In the construction example, the idea that if you have the flexibility on the completion of each task to determine if those workers are sufficient for the next task, and the workers to determine if they are getting paid promptly and want to continue on to the next task, that adds a sort of flexibility that makes the whole enterprise overall resilient, because you can not fail overall and instead tweak at each different step as you move along it. So I do think that Ivan does think that flexibility of the end result is and stability is encouraged when you have task-based completion as you move towards that end final project. And
Yeah,
the
it
one,
allows.
go
I
ahead.
just it allows for constant feedback,
Right,
right?
absolutely.
So instead of yearly employee reviews, where one time a year your performance is reviewed, then you have hourly, weekly, daily reviews, and
Yeah.
all that's gonna do is make you better. That's just coaching,
Right on. Yeah, and just one of the things you mentioned when you a little bit earlier was kind of tracking the artistic provenance of certain ideas that artists are kind of gestating. And I don't know how exactly this would track onto it. This is very kind of brainstormy, but like AI, of course, repurposes all of humanity's cultural products to itself produce something which it claims is new. If there's a way to track and
Yeah.
give value to people's inputs into an AI through some sort of a lightning base, you get a microsat every time the AI drops your token, a token influenced by you or something like that, then all these, that mitigates the lawsuits based on copyright infringement. People aren't so worried if their input is going into an AI, if somehow they can be rewarded for having produced that thing that is then being repurposed by the AI as if it was that AI's conscious thought. And so, yeah, no, again, that's brainstorming. I don't know how that all plays out. That's
I want
something
to
that,
I want to think about that for a second, because so the thing about AI that people have been talking about for so long is like, oh, it'll just make everything free. It'll make all of this information free, and
yeah,
you'll have the sum of the world's wisdom and knowledge at your fingertips for zero cost. But if it is set up like that, then yeah, then you've got micropayments being made to all of the sources
right.
that contributed to that. So that's kind of fascinating. I think what we saw with DeepSeek is that the cost of AI is rapidly crashing to zero. Like, for they made a model better than any other model in the world, and I think it cost them $5.8 million to train it, which is
According to their own self-report. There's some question
okay.
on whether that's like China
On that,
OPSEC or like a China kind of PSYOP or whatever, to say
I
here's
get
how far ahead of you, and also to obscure the
okay.
fact that they were stealing a bunch of training from. Again, I don't know what that is. This is an emergent situation as far as DeepSeek's capability, but I do agree with you. I mean, there is, I guess, maybe get too much in the weeds, but OpenAI has requested some enormous amount of money because like
Yeah,
compute is going to become so important. So whether it crashes to zero, I think you're right. It's going to get marginally less costly per like query or whatever, even as the number of queries explodes, such as the amount of compute consumed overall is going to increase vastly.
yeah. I've never thought about that idea of the AI giving basically micropayments to all of the sources, but It does make sense. It's sound, I think, in that it would resolve a lot of the issues that we have now. It does seem like it would be really hard to enforce, but I love the idea.
And it
Um,
does seem like I forget if this was in Alden or Software or just something tertiary I read that Bitcoin will likely be the preferred currency of AI, even if it's given its own kind of unmotivated choice as to what to use, just given that it's permissionless and decentralized. And so that AI will want to use Bitcoin. And so micro SAT transactions will be perhaps native to AI as it develops. That'd be cool.
I
Then,
think it,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, that is the most logical answer, right? Because why would this has been the argument for a long time. Why would a internet native worker, which would be AI, why would an internet native worker use a non-native money?
right. Yeah.
It would make sense that the internet native worker would use the internet native money, because otherwise it is just added friction to the system and keeps you from maximizing the potential of that.
Yeah.
Um, can we talk about logistics?
We can talk about logistics. Do you have a zero in point you want to focus on?
I am just So when I was in grad school, my major professor had come from a program where he was writing algorithms for flight control, for airports. And the other day, I read something. I can't remember who it was. Some big giant in the airline industry or wherever, talking about the uselessness of air control towers, because air control towers really, they don't, um, like, there's no sense for them to be up in the sky looking at things, because they're never looking anymore.
Yeah.
Everything is on a computer terminal, and it's all um, algorithmically automated, um, and it saves you know thousands of lives every single year,
Yeah.
by avoiding all the, well, it may not save lives. It increases the throughput. Instead of being able to land 2 planes an hour, now you can land 30,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Um, and it's just fast. If you're ever at an airport, park on the outside, like a busy airport. Like I'm in Denver, so Denver International Airport. Park there and just sit and look and watch how many planes are coming in and out, and they're landing like every minute or two
Right.
minutes. The throughput is insane. And so I think about this, like, the logistics side of it, and you can take it all the way down to the guy who is installing doors, on the construction site, and it's just the straight gig thing. And he's got an app on his phone, and that app shows him which jobs are available, what they pay, what the exact specs are, and what the location is. And normally he works in a 5 mile radius from home, but now he wants to go visit his sister in Denver. And so he looks at it and he goes, hey, it turns out I can hit this one and this one and this one, and I can make my way 3/4 of the way to Denver. I can pay for the entire trip. It's the same type of work. And so what this does to me is it truly highlights the ridiculousness of. So my least favorite subject when I was in school was geography, because when I was like third or fourth grade, they broke out this book and they said, here's what the map used to look like. Here's what it looks like now. Here's what it might look like in the future. And I was like, this is all horseshit. Like, this is all just made up lines. The joke was always, whenever two white guys got into an argument, we had to redraw the maps, and it kind of pissed me off because I had to relearn all of these names. But what this does, the logistics capability of these digital currencies and the smart contracts that underlie, it really does highlight the ridiculousness of some of these imaginary lines, and the idea that when you go from here to here, that all of a sudden you're in a different world. And you
Yeah.
are. I mean, you truly are, of course. But
Yeah.
what we're going to see as a result of this is just so much more blending and blurring of those lines, where
Right.
you know you're going to, like, it is very much in the benefit of a county that is on the border to another state to allow for residents of the bordering county in the other state to compete for jobs, and also reciprocally to allow their customers or their people to compete for jobs in the other county, because it broadens the amount of work that can be done. It increases the labor force. Anytime that you have more buyers and more sellers in a market, you have a more clear market signal, and you have a more efficient market clearing program. And so I think you're going to see that kind of in the beginning, where
Yeah.
it's like these little back and forth between, you know, between Norton County and on the top rung of counties in Kansas, and the county, Harlan County, I think, is the one up in Nebraska that's right north of Norton, where it's like, okay, you know, this guy's going to come down and he's going to ranch down here, and this guy's going to come down up here and he's going to put
Yeah.
in windows. I think you're going to see a lot more of that as a result of this. This is revolutionizing to the industry right now. Like a very, it was it's been a very good job to be a logistics person for trucking. You know, they're typically stay at home jobs. They typically make over 100 grand. It is a pretty damn good job, and that's going to be replaced by an algorithm that allows the trucker to just tap, tap, tap. Okay, I'm taking this freight from New Jersey to California. And then as soon as I get to California, um, I can decide on the way, or I can just wait. I can take time off. I can do whatever. And then I just get back on the app and I tap it. This is, this is that Uber for everything idea, where the concept of Uber, eliminating the third party, eliminating the middleman, which they didn't quite do. They sort of missed the boat on that one, where they kind of became a middleman that takes a massive percentage, and
Hmm.
that's not great. But that Uber is coming to everything, right?
Yeah.
Uber for babysitters, and Uber for grandpas that are helping out around the house doing some odd jobs and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, that point you note about so Ivan's kind of application of instant settlement to these different industries is about eliminating frictions. One of the
Yep.
biggest, a big friction is arbitrary lines on the map. And so, I mean, the Forex market with these foreign exchange fees for when you change currencies between jurisdictions. There's also just the fact, and Ivan mentions this in his essay on gambling, that if you're in a very regulated industry, if you remove yourself as a target of regulation, sometimes you can kind of skirt through. So, an open source and permissionless piece of software can do things that a corporation perhaps cannot because there's no target for a regulator. And so, if you have an open source transparent app connected to the Lightning Network, maybe it's going to allow for certain types of frictionless interstate transfers that otherwise would be caught up in red tape and exchange fees. And I mean, of course, we see that with remittances now, but also it definitely applies in the realm of logistics, as you mentioned, that we can integrate supply chains globally in that way. I guess just as a side point, this is stepping in a different direction from the essay even, but just you noted that the it's always better if there's open market irrespective of arbitrary lines on the map. And I think we see that, maybe that's not the case. If market clearance or coming up with a clear price signal is your only goal overall, perhaps, but also these seemingly arbitrary lines, we saw this play out in the US with the immigration debate. They also can mark cultural and even historic. There's reasons why we have these lines. They're not absolutely arbitrary, and they can serve as divisions that are real in the kind of lived lives of people aside from the products they buy. So that's maybe not an alleyway to go down, but just to note that instant settlement is maybe a market thing, but there are other factors at play that are going to keep lines on the map, perhaps, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's cultural differences, and everything. I think I think anything that you do to slow down the adoption of clear market pricing, clear signals, is in some way a form of protectionism or nationalism, or um,
Yeah.
you know some sort of micro version of that. Yeah, I mean, good or bad, whatever, it
Right.
does exist, and it always will. Um, yeah, removing friction is just the key here. When I watched Jack Mallers present, I think it was the 2022 Bitcoin conference, and he was talking about Strike and talking about the Lightning Network and talking about how he used, I think it was potato chips, to explain the difference between the Lightning Network and the traditional banking rails to, um, to boomers and the billionaires that they were working with. I remember watching that and thinking like, oh, Visa, MasterCard are dead, like dead, 100% dead. And then I I was I I became close to someone who was in the MasterCard system, and I was able to hear a lot of kind of the internal talk about what they're trying to do. Which, I mean, it's not internal, it's not privileged information or anything, but just like, strategy and direction. And the constant theme was that we're going to bank on our brand. We're going to bank on the value of the name of MasterCard, and we're going to put that on new things, and we're going to leverage and arbitrage that brand recognizability and that consumer trust in order to attempt to stay relevant.
Hmm.
And that that makes me think of Mark Andreessen in a recent podcast with, I can't remember who it was, but he quoted a conversation he had with Elon Musk where he was asked about why they don't have like gaudy hood ornaments and stuff on Teslas, or like, like you can barely tell that it's a Tesla. It has like a tiny little emblem on the front, and maybe it says the model, but a lot of them don't even say the model. And he said, well, the thing is that if you make the best product, then you don't need a brand.
Hmm.
Like the brand doesn't matter. And I hadn't thought about that MasterCard thing for a long time. I hadn't thought about that, oh, we're just banking on the brand. We're going to, because it makes sense. It's like, oh, we're Berkshire Hathaway, we're JP Morgan, we're we're these big giants that are we have this trusted consumer model. And then I got to thinking about, oh, I heard that quote and I was like, oh, we're J.C. Penney, we're Sears and Roebuck, we're General Electric, we're Blockbuster. We're all these brands that banked on their brand and failed to recognize that it was nothing more than a shift in technology that lessened the friction for the consumer in order to participate in the market. And to tie this clear back around into something that I think about a lot, probably the most foundational book that I've ever read is Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he talks about the importance of setting up yourself for success. You don't achieve the level we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. And talks about the importance of establishing those habits, establishing those rituals in order to get your goals met. the goal is not the outcome. The goal is the activity. If you're trying to lose weight and get jacked, then your goal is not to lift 285 pounds. Your goal is to show up at the gym 5 times a week and do the workout and do it for 5 years. And he mentions an example of one guy who lost like 100 pounds by creating a gym habit that he started solely by going to the gym. Like he first started by, I'm going to put my shoes on and I'm going to walk out the door and then I'm going to walk back. And he did that for a week. And the next week it was like, I'm going to put my shoes on, I'm going to walk out the door, I'm going to drive by the gym and then home. The third week, I'm going to go into the gym for 5 minutes and I put him home. And so he's just like building upon this, building upon this. And what he's doing is he is ritualizing all of these micro habits that you have to do in order to get there. You have to have your gym clothes ready. Like I remember thinking when I read that, I remember thinking, dude, that hits me so hard because there have been times when I wanted to go to the gym and I was ready and I did not go to the gym because I could not find the sock that I wanted to. Like I would look at my big, oh, I want to wear these socks. And I'm like, but I can only find one of them. I have 20 other pairs of socks, but I was really set on this. And that friction, that decision making friction right there is what kept me from achieving the goal. And so I think that Ivan accurately represents that everything about bettering the consumer experience is about removing friction. It's about, we talked about this earlier actually off camera, but it's removing the pain point. What is your pain point? What is the thing that makes it difficult for you to engage in this so that you may not do it 100% of the time, even though you want to do it 100% of the time? You want to give your best. Like nobody, we all want to give our best effort. Nobody feels good about showing up for a job and slacking off and getting paid shit per hour, and doing even shittier work per hour in order to get that. Like nobody goes home and feels good about that. Nobody writes books about that. Nobody inspires people by doing that. What you do is you do create a hunger for something like this, a hunger for a pain point removed experience, a hunger for the growth of a frictionless economy, um, and people that are just excited about being involved in that. You know, I think that
Yeah.
there's a lot of joy that is right around the corner when
Yeah.
looking at those things.
No, it takes us down to one of the key insights from Ivan's essay series of the transformative shift of pay for work from pay for time. To quote Ivan, quote, work transforms us, makes us better, faster, stronger, and more skillful versions of our former selves. And who doesn't want that, right? I mean, who doesn't? That's to be fully human is to always be improving yourself and becoming what you can become. And so his idea is like salaried jobs don't incentivize that. They punish that. They generally, I mean, you can have other types of incentive structures, but generally they punish people who want to develop themselves through their work, because that's an extra effort the person has to take, and they're not being paid for that. They're just being paid for the time they spend at that place. And so this is a question I have for you, Lucas, and maybe just a general reflection point for anybody who's had these disparate experiences. You've worked both salaried jobs and also done kind of task per task gig economy work. And I'm just wondering if you see if Ivan's insights track onto your own personal experience. And of course, it's not going to be perfect because the nature of the gig economy jobs is oftentimes people take them in a downtime because they need to do some work. So it's not what they would ideally want to be doing. But do any of these psychological insights that Ivan kind of begins to feel out as far as like enabling people to self-improve, did you see that in kind of gig versus salaried work or any sort of the things that he notes?
Yeah. So just to give some background, so what you're referencing is my time as a musician and a band leader, which would be the gig side, and then my experience in banking and finance and sales, which each of those roles none of those roles were purely salary. They each were some sort of performance. They had some sort of performance based aspect, but
Yeah.
um, the first thing that came to mind when you were talking about that was this quote that I think it's like the most addictive things in life are heroin and a bi-monthly paycheck or something like that. Um, I can tell you that the difference of the people that are drawn to the gig economy and the people that are working a salaried job with a 401k and team performance goals, not individual performance goals, um, where the team performance goals are 20% performance and 80% staying in line with um, whatever sycophantic commandments have been laid down as the company culture that you have to step to. Um, I'll just give a couple observations. The salaried folks are fatter. Like that's a physical observation that I think is very consistent. They're
Yeah.
fat. They're less healthy. Um, I don't see them at the gym. Um, I am constantly shocked at the hypocritical nature of people involved in those industries who have something on their LinkedIn profile or put up something on Instagram to show how they went out of the way and above and beyond to serve a customer. But the back end of that is that when a customer calls that they aren't particularly fond of, and they happen to be watching a movie at work, then they just say, "Meh, I'll do it later." Or even more insidious is when a employee who they aren't particularly fond of wants them to do something that is their job. Then they slow play it and knock it down, and so you have these internal politics that end up punishing the customer. Um, and really, like you never see that. You are a consumer, and you do not realize how many times in your life that your consumer experience has suffered because John in sales was having an argument with Kathy in accounting. Like you have no clue. Um, and these are very another observation is that these are these salaried um, kind of kept houses, house mice, house mouse jobs. They are very incestual. They encourage, even though there's always HR against it, there's always these interoffice romances and dramas going on that end up affecting the bottom line of the company, sometimes in massive ways, like truly massive ways, but at the very least in small enough ways that can't be noticed but are felt over time. So, and
Yeah.
that would be, yeah, that would be kind of mine. But I want to hear your thoughts on it
Well,
too, because
I think
you're a
just to
lawyer.
right, but just to mention, like, so your observation that health is one of the emergent things impacted when you are paid for time rather than like work rendered. And I mean, it just, there's probably a lot of it. I think that is generally true. And I think there's probably a lot of explanations, like, because if people aren't encouraged to develop a skill set through reward for task completion, your life is just generally and vaguely more depressing if you're not cultivating a craft, but instead you're just like cultivating the ability to while away your time. Another quote from Ivan that I think doubles down or fleshes out this point. The result of the pay for time kind of model is a culture of dependency where the quest for easy money overshadows the pursuit of self improvement. So he says that, and then I want to pause there just because the next sentence is striking. He poses a question: how many steps are we from enslaving our own children to avoid working? And that's maybe a somewhat hyperbolic way of making the point that once you begin to go down that road of money for nothing, which is the essence of the fiat mindset of just being paid for sitting or being in a place, or even not being in a place, just being paid for duration of time expended, then it's an easy shift into, I want to be paid for the future time of other people. And that's the essence of the fiat money printer, where we spend without balancing through taxation, where we accrue a massive deficit and pass it on to the future. We use that fiat mechanic to steal value from future generations. We have like Social Security, which is not funded, which is going to like run out in 2034 or something like that, probably quicker if things keep on accelerating. So I think that he makes an actual, it sounds hyperbolic, but it's a very good point. How many steps are we from enslaving our own children to avoid working? We don't want to work now, so we accrue deficits and push them off onto future generations that are going to have to deal with them. And so it's very insidious, that pay for time model. And I don't think that, just the fact that it bubbles out unconsciously in the form of one's health shows how deep it is in our culture. And, it's something that we would need an anthropologist, a sociologist to really get deep and kind of plumb out the implications of what a switch to a pay for work model would mean.
Yeah, I personally witnessed people slow walk multi-million-dollar deals to the plate so that the sale could go on next quarter or next month or next year, um, because they had already hit their bonus incentives or something. So they literally had no incentive to do anything different. And that's tens of thousands. Like if you're talking about a $10 million deal, that's tens of thousands of dollars that is lost in the system by slow playing that. There's loss on both sides. It truly does lead to a corruption of skills. And the other side is the iron sharpens iron. Is
Right.
that when you're out there and you are competing, that you have a real life barometer of your skill, because it's being measured in terms of what you get paid for it. The quote that money isn't the best way of measuring a man, but it's the best one we have, I think is really applicable. Where it's like, yeah, what value do you contribute, and how does the world view that, and what are they willing to pay in return for that? I wanted to know about, so I experienced this. I'm going to lay a little background, a little groundwork, before I ask this question and kind of throw it back to you. But so Grant and I lived together. Grant was kind enough to allow me to stay with him in Washington for a couple months, and I got to witness the most insane work ethic I've ever seen outside of my mother. Except my mother doesn't get up as early as you, so I think you've even got her beat. But I watched
I'm
the guy.
spiritually older than your mother, is what you're saying. So, yeah.
You may be. Yeah, there's a shot. There's a chance. But so I got up to Washington. I'm like, hey, I'm going to move in with my buddy. We're going to have fun. There's all this outdoor stuff to do. There's all this blah blah blah. I was there for 3 months, and I think that there was one full day that you didn't work, and I think that there was one half day that you didn't work. But every single other, like most Sundays, you would work 8 hours. Most Saturdays, you would work like 10, probably something like that, 8 to 10. Most days, you would work 12 to 14. Um, and this was in a situation where your cohorts were 9 to 5ers primarily, a lot of them. And so I'm interested to see, because I know that I have very much fallen victim to the trap of, well, if I'm not going to get paid more, I'm not going to work more. I'm a human. I'm a human. I'm a learning machine, and it is a feature, not a bug, that when you put someone into a program where they do not get paid more for more performance, that they adjust to that system. That's learning. That's not people taking advantage of the system. That is learning the system and treating the system as it was meant to be treated, which is to make people time slaves. And so I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that, because I feel like you were somewhat immune to it. Although I'm certain that there were times where it just felt completely different from that, where you're like, oh, I'm just going to stare at this clock and watch my life tick away.
No,
But what's your kind of experience been in that, especially working in law? Because when lawyers charge by the hour, lawyers and
yeah,
hookers. Yeah,
yeah, no. So a lot of what Ivan says resonates with me as far as work is a medium for improving one's skill set. And it's a way that you know, he doesn't use these terms, but when you develop a craft, you develop yourself. And I just think that like that material feedback with the world reaches back into you and changes who you are for the better, and it's essential that we do that. So the work that I was doing as an attorney was salaried, so it was not I wasn't earning per hour, but you're right that I was working way beyond the 9 to 5 that was set for me. I was working such that I got in trouble for working too much because people they couldn't understand that like the motivation for my work was internal. I became connected to my clients and really wanted to help them in the specific legal issues that I was working on with them, but also that notion of a craft where I saw what I was doing, saw the ways to improve it, and saw the ways that improving that craft would improve myself. And so I really wanted to double down into it. But they did not have an incentive structure to reward that, to acknowledge it. And so, I mean, long story short, I'm no longer working at that job. And you could call it burnout, or you could just call it, realizing that the incentive structure is not matching up with, the way that you actually operate. And I saw that to be sustainable in that job, I would have to dial back my work ethic essentially. I would have to dial back the development of my craft and what I was doing. And so that the work I was doing had this perverse incentive that was constantly nagging at me. It was true that the more work that I did, the less that I was paid, because you don't get more if you
yep,
work more hours. But I just couldn't stand that insidious dynamic where I was being told to make myself less, because to develop your craft less, to care less for the clients that you're assisting. And so, a pay for work model really aligns incentives in a way that maybe I would still be working where I was or in the same area of law if incentives had been more properly aligned. So it just goes back to Ivan's central point that, if you don't align incentives within a system, he notes this, employee retention is one area that's going to be tough, because people, I think the best people in the job do want to deploy and develop themselves within the framework of their work. There are some times in your life where you just need a paycheck to pay the rent and you're going to do the Panera Bread cashier or whatever. But, for the most part, we're hoping to find a job that's going to engage us in the world we live in, enable us to make the world better through the skills we have, and enable us to sharpen ourselves as we do that. And so if you don't align incentives, you lose people like that. And it's why I don't work where I used to work.
yeah. And just for clarification, it was by choice. It's not as though you were asked to leave.
No, that's
Um,
correct. Yeah. And so that goes to the employee retention thing, right? Yeah. If they had better incentives for retaining, I mean, maybe that's one of the perverse things is certain types of work don't want to retain people who work hard because it makes others feel bad. And I don't want to say that was the case with my cohort necessarily, but I think it perhaps was the general culture of that employer where, you know, some people felt bad if others worked more than they did.
yeah. I think this highlights the hypocritical nature of um, businesses that bring together their employees and try to unite them under a team aspect, that we're all in this together. And because we're all in this together, that we're all going to have the same standards and we're all going to step to the same beat. Um, but the glaring the glaring issue with that arises, which is what you noted, is that when somebody in that system puts forth extra effort, then those around them look upon that derisively and they feel as though that person is making them look bad. Now take that exact same thing and put it on an actual team, a football team, and you've got the guy who stays after practice and throws 50 more passes, who shows up early and makes sure he gets his stretching in, who's hitting his early morning workouts, who is over being overly exuberant in all aspects. People don't go up to that person and tell them to tone down. That's not the nail that they hit in order to knock down. That is the person that they look to as the inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
That's the person that builds this groundswell of other individuals saying, "Oh, that's possible. I could put forth this effort. I could get, I could get this much better. I could, I could have this um, approach that I'm just here to get better. I'm not here to just not be somewhere else for a while."
Yeah, yeah.
And those are the people that end up with the C on their uniform. Those are the people that are truly inspiring. So
What's the
I,
C on the uniform? I'm not familiar with that.
captain,
Oh,
captain.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I should have said that. But yeah, I think it just truly highlights what
No, absolutely.
all these buzzwords like, oh,
Yeah.
we're in this together, we're on the same team. But it's like, no, you're not. By killing individual performance, you end up killing the team.
Yeah.
Each team, when a team executes individually in order to achieve as a group.
Yeah.
And so you have to have people who are striving to do the best at what they do, regardless of how it makes someone else feel about their own effort.
Right. And you can't even necessarily blame the clock watcher. Like they have
No,
just fully adopted the incentives of the system they're within. They're very
yeah,
intelligent. And so
like I said, like
it,
that's learning.
yeah,
That
right.
that's
It,
taking
it
feedback
legitimately
and
is a
learning.
threat. It legitimately is a threat to their mode of operation if someone is saying we should work at this more intense rhythm or work more so that we can fully deploy and develop our craft. And the clock watcher says I'm not rewarded for that, and neither are you. And so step back. And it's an excellent metaphor you give of the football team. Maybe one aspect of switching to a pay for work system is the return of maybe to put too highfalutin language on or something, but it's like a return to everyday heroism where you see people
Mm-hmm.
who do, when you are inspired to better yourself by seeing the people around you bettering themselves and working hard rather than trying to pull them down so you aren't expected to work as hard as they do.
Yeah, I think the conclusion that we can come to out of this is that you are a very slow learner.
Yeah, I've concluded that myself various times.
I
So
mean,
there's,
yeah. And by the way, so like that's the same thing with my mom. My mom works a state job, and it's one of those jobs that it would be very difficult to be fired from that job.
yeah,
You would have to do a lot. As my major professor in grad school, he got tenure when I was 20 or 21. I didn't know him very well. I just kind of hung out with him because he was the major professor of some other friends, and he was a cool guy. And on Friday nights, we would all gather at his house, and all the poor, broke college students would come over, and we'd drink his beer, and I'd play my guitar on the back patio, and we'd smoke cigars and talk like we knew shit. And he was a young guy. He was 40 when he got tenure, or maybe even earlier than that. And his wife invited me to his tenure celebration party, and I was like, I don't know what tenure is. So I asked him. I said, "What does tenure mean? Like, what actually does that do?" He goes, "Put it this way." He goes, you could sexually offend someone twice, and they can't like it either time before they even think about firing you." And they're like, "Yeah, that's pretty much what a state job is." But yeah, so my mom is the same way. She works 80 hours a week at a job that she could very, very easily work 15 hours a week at, and still get the same recognition. And she gets all of these recognitions for things that she does and goes way above and beyond and stuff. And I have noticed negative sentiment from people around her that it's, hey, you're making us look bad. Like we're just here to punch the time and get out. So yeah, I completely understand that. I see it around my life, and now I love how Ivan has put this into a framework where I can now view my mother and you as slow learners, and myself I can congratulate um, at times lazy approach to performance because I was not incentivized. I can congratulate myself for being intelligent.
Yeah, no,
It's all about building me up.
no, resisting perverse incentives in a slow, reticent fashion is definitely makes one a slow learner. Best just to get in the system and operate like the clog that we were born to be. So this essay has, we've jumped over. I think we've illustrated the broad and general concepts that Ivan wants to reveal by examining various industries. We've also looked at a couple of the specific industries. Within that, just to drop some Easter eggs, it's worth reading the entirety of this series because he drops a lot of different interesting examples. Again, he's applying this idea of what instant settlement might mean in different industries. And along the way, he kind of casually talks about how influencers could, their incentives could be more aligned with the products that they are acting as the marketers for. He talks about how taxis, you could revolutionize the way that drivers and passengers kind of contract with the taxi driver for the duration of the ride. He even talks about how streaming itself seems like pay for time, but it can be also, it's payment for such a small subslice of time. It almost approximates a type of pay for work. And he talks about all these different things in this essay series. So, I would encourage, I guess, if you want to dial in any topics to further discuss, Lucas, we can, but I would encourage everybody to read this essay and see all the different examples he gives. And then like he has two quotes at the end that he says are kind of his final message. One, build utility, do not promise future fortunes. And then second, do not wait or ask permission to do work. Do the work that you want to do. And I would encourage everybody to read these essays with that latter sentiment in mind. Do the work that you want to do. If you don't understand your industry and industry perfectly, you can still begin to think about how it can be improved with instant settlement, to maybe even, talk with an app developer, someone like Breeze, about what your industry, how Lightning could be integrated into that. And just, yeah, keep on thinking, keep on reading, keep on applying these things that you read about Bitcoin to the world, because we really are on the forefront of how Bitcoin is going to fix all of this.
Yeah, I loved it. I think Ivan did a killer job. I really enjoyed this discussion because it allowed me to kind of wander through a bunch of life experiences and think about some people in my life that I can view in a different light and look upon them favorably and with grace. And so, yeah, I'm thrilled that we had this discussion, and I'm looking forward to the next one. This has been very fun. You got anything else?
That's it. Thanks for joining along. I appreciate it, man.
All right, gang. If you can't, what do they say? If they don't find you handsome, they should at least find you handy. Have a great day. Thank you for listening. If you like, please subscribe. Every little bit gets me one tiny step closer to my ultimate goal of living in a cave. You never have to buy windows or shingles, and there's no lawn to mow. Look it up. Dream big, kids.